Please welcome Steve Clemens, Editor-at-Large, The National Interest.
Everybody, good morning. Good morning, good morning. Listen, I'm so happy you're here today. We've got a fantastic lineup of a program today. We're going to talk about, shaping and constructing and molding the national defense and its future. I'm Steve Clemens. I'm editor-at-large of the National Interest, and we're so happy to be working with GE Aerospace here today, and I hope you're enjoying what you've seen so far. I'm going to read some notes here because I want to get it all right. And I think it's amazing what technology can do. We've got plenty of it on display in this back room back here. We hope that you're enjoying your latte. Some of you came and got lattes early, and our 3D printing was not yet working. But guess what? The F-15 is now being printed on the lattes in the back. So that's, I hear, is underway. So please enjoy one of those. Also, I got a picture last night of some of the most powerful engines out there that are powering some of the most powerful fighters ever built. We have 3D, not only the 3D printing engine parts that you can see and interact with, but we have an F-110 engine that roars. And I want to tell you, yesterday I saw photos, somebody said photos of what we were doing, and I said, yeah, but they're just there. I said, what about, could we have the sound? And I don't know if they can turn the sound on now, but the sound is there, and I think it really brings these things to life. So I hope you check them out. I want to give, again, a big thank you to GE Aerospace, in particular to our host, Amy Gowder, who is President and CEO of GE Aerospace Defense and Systems, for these cool activations. Look, we're meeting at a pivotal time for national defense. We had a program here yesterday with the Deputy Secretary of the Treasury and several members of Congress. We have several members of Congress coming back again today, including the chairman of the powerful House Appropriations Committee. And we're living in a plastic moment where a lot of inertia is being crushed out of the system, and that some are applauding that, and some are very worried about that. But we're at a moment of significant change. This is a historic inflection point. And today we're talking about the national security dimensions of these changes, as we talked about the national economic dimensions yesterday. This industry is leveraging faster computing, new materials, and manufacturing techniques to power warfighters with increased range and flexibility that in turn have the potential to ensure continued U.S. air dominance. Last night we had a fantastic discussion where we're looking at what AI was doing for materials, was doing for operating complex systems, was doing for systems integration, how it's kind of bringing all these different pieces together. And it was an extraordinary discussion, and we have many people who were part of that, and I hope you'll bring the knowledge that you shared last night to our discussions today. The Trump administration has sent several bold signals on its intent to ensure continued U.S. military dominance, with the announcement of an F-47 last month, last month, and a potential first ever, this is pretty staggering, a huge jump, a $1 trillion defense budget just yesterday, and also talking about the importance of technology and military exports around the world. This morning's program is going to focus on how smart policies and public-private partnerships can get better and can drive both innovation and efficiency in defense aviation. We've got an incredible lineup of speakers from the Department of Defense, from Congress, and from defense tech companies to help us do that. Now I get to have some fun with a good friend who I'm going to beat up a little bit. Chris Miller, former Acting Secretary of Defense and advisor at Fulcrum Venture Group. Please welcome Chris Miller. Chris, thank you.
Beat me up,
No,
Steve.
I'm just joking.
Oh my gosh.
No, I say this in a very friendly way. Chris,
wait a second. We got to go there. F-15, greatest air superiority fighter ever made. And you know what I love about that plane? You talk to the people that flew. I had glasses, so I wasn't allowed to go into the Air Force, which was my dream. So I had to become a moron ground pounder in the Army. And everybody, I love listening to old school pilots. They talk about sitting on a GE engine, and they know all the names. I don't know. I'm like, the T101 was the greatest turbofan. And so I got to get a latte when this thing's over. They're going to have the phone's
I can have lattes delivered to us on stage here. If somebody wants to kind of jump at that, bring us 2 F-115, lattes. Where's Tom Shanker? Stand up, Tom. Tom is a legendary journalist who's been in the New York Times for 25 years. He's teaching at GW. He's someone who taught me how to do my work, but he embedded with Chris years ago, I think in Afghanistan. And I just want to kind of reunite the two because he was talking to me about your deep roots. He told me this morning, you were a guy who did it all. You were in special forces. We talked this morning about you were in detachments that captured 2 capitals in Afghanistan and Iraq. And I want to kind of have our audiences, you went very high up in to become acting Secretary of Defense, and I don't know if there's a hall at the Pentagon of portraits of acting Secretary of Defenses, but you should be up there. But I want to ask you about this because knowing the deep roots of deployment, of serving, of having been engaged with threats to the United States, I'd like you to reflect on this moment now of looking at threats and how the Pentagon and our national security system is working in taking threats, taking our military assets and defense platforms like we're talking about today, taking the evolution of technology. And I would say, what would you give the grade, Chris? Are we doing A+ work, or do we need to improve it?
Well, you triggered me with Tom Shanker because we were in Afghanistan, Tom, December-ish, 01. We just got to Kandahar. I had avoided all media training in my entire military career. Like, I'm never going to have to talk to the press. And here's what we're talking on at the time. We had SATCOM, but it was a very low pipe and very low bandwidth. But we had the first almost chat feature. It was almost email feature. And I get this note, like, the New York Times is going to embed with you. And I was like, oh, what have I done wrong with my life? Tom shows up, New York Times, and saw how we worked. And if you recall then, we were literally working off of Vietnam-era technology. But that was a really important campaign, as you all know. That was where we integrated our strike complex, our aircraft and whatnot, with people on the ground. If I could be pedantic for just a moment, I'd like to do a really quick scene setter and just focus on the overarching nature of what we're facing right now. And, I got to go Clausewitz, right? We got to go there. The nature of war never changes. Fog, friction, fear, anger, etc. What we're experiencing right now, and Tom and I got to see probably just the glimmer of the future, which is a transformation of warfare. And it's not bad. This is the thing, like, everybody wants to badmouth the Pentagon. They're too slow. Oh my gosh. That's what we exactly want. We want a conservative Pentagon. These are life and death decisions going on, but I think we can see definitively that we're reverting back to an era where quantity is more important than quality. Quality won the Cold War. It was the right strategy, but we're reverting back to a phase where the defense is more powerful than the offense. So when we think about it that way, the military, the DoD, has not yet fully grasped this transformation. Defense Innovation Unit doing wonderful work. We have all these really, really smart people out there that recognize it, but we have not fundamentally changed. And I will close with this, Steve, and I'm not going to ask you about your experience in Hollywood with Rising Sun, working with Sean Connery. Little fun fact for those of you that don't know that.
Thank you. It was great.
Was it? It must have.
It was great.
It must have been something else. The Department of Defense will not change internally. This is a fact. So let's just recognize it. Oh, my F-15. Oh, that's...
It actually is on the cafe lattes now. If any
it's
of
like
you
an F-35 to me.
Look, we have 5 minutes, so make
right,
it good.
I'll be done. That's why Amy, thanks for getting us together. Public-private's going to be the future. I think it's private-public. And then finally, we have a lot of people here from the Hill. Goldwater Nichols, NSC 1947. Change will only come from external direction, and that's why it's so important that Congress is here and understands kind of what is going on. We in the Department of Defense, I'm not there anymore, Liz, it's not going to transform on its own.
So my question is, if you were made, theoretically, someday Secretary of Defense, what would you need to unplug or undo? And we're sitting here with one of the world's greatest engine makers in the world, that's both in the commercial and in the national, defense sector. And they're succeeding. And so I always ask this question in Washington, D.C. Are all of the forces AI, is gravity sort of largely taking us where we're going to go anyway, so we won't have to think about it? Or do we have hard choices that public policy matters because gravity is not going to get us where we need to go? What do we need to either get unstuck or add to the system to get greater performance that we deserve?
The knee-jerk reaction is we need acquisition reform. We don't need acquisition reform. It's already happened. There's some great studies recently about how we can improve the existing authorities and change the incentive structure. So I'm not going to give you the knee-jerk. Here's my thought. We won the Cold War. We won World War II based on a very centralized industrial age machine. Like, oh my gosh, in the Army, like everything has to be exactly the same, from the person's bootlaces all the way up, and it made sense then. But what I really think is occurring is we need to flip the innovation model on its head. Liz will be up to talk about it. She will argue with me, which is fine. But what I'm seeing, and I go out to the field a lot, and what I'm seeing right now is the kids in the field understand innovation and technology in a way that the Pentagon never will. So here's what I want to do, and this is my kind of big idea, which isn't that big idea, is we have to flip the innovation model on its head, and we need to almost Shark Tank the young kids in the field. Give them some money, some of it's going to get wasted, that's all right, I don't mind, and then Shark Tank it, and we need to have innovation come from the bottom up. And I'll just close with this, like, never predict what future of war is going to be like. Anybody that does that's liar or not very intelligent, so I'm not doing that. But regardless of the fight that we're going to see in the future, it's going to be decentralized, and you're going to have to disaggregate your combat power. So I think more systems are better. Instead of everybody having the exact same stuff, that's actually going to be a weakness. Having like tons of AI algorithms, obviously you got to connect the software.
Right. A lot of people know that you swim in some of the same lanes with Trump administration officials, maybe even President Trump if he swam. But I think in that world, we're thinking of AI. You brought this book up here, Warbot 1.0, Brian Michelson, a novel of the next war, and it talks about AI going to war. Michelle Flournoy, wrote about AI on the battlefield already in Foreign Affairs magazine. My question is, how does the Trump crowd look at innovation? Do they get the importance of this transformation that's happening right now about technology and innovation and how to get the nexus right, the best you can tell?
I believe that the current cadre, and let's be honest, the administration's still forming at the Department of Defense. But the initial indications to me are that they understand that there's a transformation of war and the old way of doing business, $14 billion aircraft carriers, manned fighters, M1 Abrams tanks. Doing more of that is not going to deter our enemies. We will see in the budget. Honestly, I hate that's so cliche. I know you're like, oh, here we go. Right now, I would argue we only spend about $10 billion a year on true innovation within the Department of Defense. You can argue, we can quibble. That's a $1 trillion budget, though. It's a rounding error. So we really, really we'll see with this next budget realignment and where they focus their energy.
I just want to point out, just in the last minute, Ambassador Dan Fried, stand up for a second. I want people to know you. You're great. Where's Jane Harman? Jane Harman is kind of the Maria Callas of defense and technology, It's another way to say a diva of this, and it's just such an honor to have you both. Dan Fried, one of the greatest ambassadors and also Assistant Secretary of State. I mention them because I'm just sort of interested in whether or not in the national security space we need to have a brutal internal war to achieve a new consensus, or is there going to be an ability to work across party lines, come together on these things? Best you kind of look at it, because I get the sense that there are opportunities for working together. Is this one of them? Or do you think we've got to go through and, knock each other to hell before we come to a consensus about how innovation and our next national security goals are going to be set?
It would be great if we could do the internal knockdown, drag out, and keep it out of the press. Biggest problem I've had with my favorite service, which is the United States Marine Corps, is they used to keep their arguments in-house. And with Force Design 2035 or whatever, they've broken ranks. I would love to have this discussion and gain consensus and move forward. I haven't seen it yet, and frankly, we've politicized the Department of Defense and the military in a way that I think is very unhelpful, and I think it's up to us in this room, frankly, to get that thing back in our traditional Republican norms.
Did you like your-
Republican. I don't mean that, party affiliation.
How's the cappuccino?
Dude, it was unbelievable.
Cheers.
And my F-15 is still there.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Thank
Chris
you.
Miller, former acting Secretary of Defense, thank you so much for joining us, my friend. Thank you.
Please welcome Gene Meserve, host of NatSec Tech Podcast.
Great to be with you all. Let me introduce my first guest, Amy Gowder, who is all of our hosts today, President and CEO of GE Aerospace Defense and Systems. Amy.
Thank you.
Great to have you with us. So I have to ask you about the news of the day. New round of tariffs imposed overnight. What kind of impact are the tariffs having on your business?
Well, I think I'll start, Gene, with the vision of the tariffs. Is really about making American manufacturing in particular more competitive. And certainly that is critical to my part of the business, the defense piece of GE Aerospace. We need a robust supply chain. We need competitive manufacturing. So we definitely support the vision. We frankly made $1 billion investment we announced this year to invest in manufacturing, both our own sites and our suppliers. We did that last year. We invested $650 million, about $450 of that was all in the US. So we really support the investment and competitiveness of manufacturing. We're also a global company, and we also have allies that depend on our defense products that we need to export and keep the security around the world at the level it needs to be. So we're also working with our partners. And we also have global sites and global employee base. And where it makes sense to have local supply feeding those local sites, are we taking advantage of very efficient ways to do trade? There's free trade zones. So we're trying to work to optimize the situation and keep competitiveness.
So the vision is to onshore more of the production, but what's the reality right now? What are you coping with?
Well, so the reality is we do have global partners, global customers, and so we're really working with them to figure out what is the best structure. Again, leveraging free trade zones and other local supply.
And of course, we want to talk about innovation. GE Aerospace talks about having a culture of innovation. How is that manifesting itself, particularly as regards warfighting?
So, we've been very aligned with the Department of Defense in that they need capability. And so we have great, outstanding engineers, and they have developed some of the most advanced technology to bring capability. Our XA100 engine, the adaptive engine, is a really important one. We also know that the Department of Defense needs to be agile. And so in our avionics business, we do what we call the digital backbone. It's the computing and network system that allows you to plug and play, just like an iPhone app. How do you plug and play into the aircraft? And so we're on the V280, and we're letting the Army be agile in their capability. And then finally, efficiency. So we've deployed in our T901 engine that will power Blackhawks and Apaches. We're giving them 50% more power, 25% more range, and frankly, cutting down the expense of the aftermarket, the service life, by 35%. So those engineers and that innovation is deployed from high-end capability to the efficiency that our armed forces need.
What would you say is your top priority for innovation right now?
Top priority is probably at two ends of the spectrum. It's around advanced material science and advanced combustion, so think hypersonics, all the way down to low-cost engines. So we know that the services need exquisite capability. They also need mass that's affordable. So we're also channeling that innovation down to how do you make it as efficient and low-cost as possible.
So hypersonics, the Chinese and the Russians have been eating our lunch in that department. When are we going to catch up? You're going to get us there.
So yes, I would about to say, we should take pride in our engineers in this country. And we took our rotating detonation from concept to test in 11 months and demonstrated that we can take rotating detonation with a dual mode ramjet, achieve thrust and the mode transition that is needed to defend and if need be an adversary.
So when are we going to match what the Chinese and the Russians have already done?
I think it'll be faster than you think, Gene. Obviously, some of
Wanna
that's
give me a time
classified.
frame?
Well, I don't think I want to get out of the classified into the classified space, but faster than you think.
Okay. Drones. The mantra is the future of warfighting is drones. What part do you play in that space, and do you buy in to that mantra?
Drones is where our low-cost engines come in. And we're building engines that can be as low as a cruise missile thrust class all the way up to what they call the CCA, collaborative combat engines. And these, we believe in manned and unmanned are needed in the future. And we're going to propulse and provide the propulsion power needed for both ends of that spectrum.
So many emerging technologies. We have AI, we have 3D printing, et cetera, et cetera. What excites you most in the innovation realm?
I am excited about how fast AI has shown efficiency in our manufacturing process and applications in our products. And then the second would be the T901 has the most additive parts in any military engine ever. And the efficiency we're getting in the performance of the engine and frankly making resilience in the supply chain has been the other exciting part.
And 3D printing, has that become a bigger and bigger part of what you do?
Absolutely. So we have a production facility down in Auburn, Alabama, that will have hundreds of machines. And as I said, T901 has the most additively printed engine, and I see that just expanding.
New materials?
New materials. We have our, on stage will later be my VP of engineering, and he has material scientists up in New York, down in Ohio, that are frankly developing stuff that would amaze you of how durable, how from an IR and RF signature, these materials are, frankly, can do things we never thought were possible.
Is innovation being adopted quickly enough, and what can be done to accelerate it?
I think the transformation we're seeing in the Department of Defense is really challenging the status quo and trying to get this technology in the hands of our warfighter. Chris, our previous guest, I heard him talking about those on the battlefield and how adaptable they are to new technology. I think we've got to get the technology to them as quickly as possible, align on the risk. It's not about the acquisition system. I think it's about the risk tolerance. So how can we get them the new technology faster?
Well, that's a real culture change. How do you bring that about? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it is a culture change for the Department of Defense and for industry. But, you know, as I see, whenever they're given a tough problem to solve in a very quick time frame, we align, we get it done. That's what I think we're seeing right now in the environment and what the department's trying to do.
Is there enough cooperation, collaboration, communication between the private sector and the government, in your view?
I think there always can be more, is my first answer to you. But every day I go into the Pentagon, I hear customers who want more collaboration, who want more of our innovation, and they're ready to work with us. So I think the attitude is the right attitude. I think we've got to continue to push that, though.
Attitude isn't enough. How do you improve it? Any thoughts?
Yes. I think, honestly, it's about creating the forums in which there's not this arm's length. It's, you know, we have industry days in the Department of Defense and for many of the programs. And I think those industry days can accelerate and be a two-way street. We've got to do more of that and not have such a fear factor of being arm's length with industry.
You say two-way street. Are you not getting enough information on your end about what's needed?
I think we get plenty of information, but I think that ability to collaborate in real time is absolutely what's needed in order to accelerate the technology and the adoption.
Is the Pentagon structured properly to do it, in your mind?
I don't think it's a structure issue. I think it is having the leadership empower the people.
We just heard a suggestion that innovation should be happening from the bottom up within the Department of Defense. Does that strike you as the right way to go, the smart way to go?
I see in GE Aerospace, as we empower at the point of impact, and that's all about our flight deck operating system, is to be at the point of impact, empower those who actually do the work to drive the innovation. So we see it in our own company. I certainly see it, as we give our young soldiers and airmen the technology they need, they can be as innovative as we need them to.
So I'd love you now to think a little outside the box
Sure.
and predict for me, given the kinds of things that your company's working on, what you think warfare is going to look like in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years.
Wow.
Think large.
Yeah, think big. I really see warfare being more automated. So I see autonomy. I see even more use of robotics. I see, I think, agility and that ability to scale without having to have as many people in harm's way will be what we can see deployed as I think about new systems.
Are we ready for that?
I certainly think the American people will want to not have as many people in harm's way. So I think that will be embraced. I think the technology will be there, and I think it's really about how we channel that to create deterrence and create security around the world.
The project you're most excited about right now?
I have so many, but I think I'm going to go back to our advanced engine technology. It is about the next generation. We are not evolving incrementally engine technology. We are at the next forefront of adaptive engine technology. That is the next step up, not an incremental evolution, but a revolution.
Do you see cooperation all around the board from Congress?
Sometimes I joke, I often have to remind myself when I'm walking into an office which party they are, to be quite blunt, because I see, honestly, the intention of every member of Congress is to not only represent those in their state and the best for their constituents, it's to, frankly, make sure we are a strong nation. So I have worked on both sides of the aisle with very similar intent of making our Department of Defense, making our warfighters the most capable, and protecting our U.S. citizens.
So they embrace innovation in your view?
I do. I see them actually being very interested in the innovation. And
do they understand the innovation sufficiently? No offense to members of Congress who may be in the audience, but we all remember some other technology issues that have come before them, and there has been a big gap.
I think as we explain, I think my team does a great job of taking the technology and explaining it in a way that's understandable. And then I think they honestly are looking to make sure things deliver. That's the question we get the most is, can we deliver this on time? Can we get over the technical hurdles that may come in our way? Can the supply base manufacture it?
And what's the answer to that question, particularly in this current moment when we're dealing with terrorists, we have concerns about the industrial base, et cetera? Can you deliver what they want in a timely fashion with the innovations that you hope to give them?
I would say COVID definitely gave us an awakening of where the workforce needs are. And I've seen the Department of Defense, particularly the Navy, invest in that. We, GE Aerospace, have been very focused and specific about developing our workforce. I think that's a key element to it. I think understanding certain elements of the supply chain, the raw material side of it, needs more investment. It could use some innovation as well, but really we can't penny pinch when it comes to investing in some of the capability, particularly as you get down into the raw material side.
So the workforce issue is a huge one. You said you're addressing it, but it needs to be addressed more broadly. Mm-hmm. How have you been successful at this? What would you recommend?
I think why we've been successful is we focused on both technical competency, think of a VOTEC program, and in creating a pipeline for machinists and technicians and investing in our own specific training, all the way to partners with outstanding universities and a diverse set of universities to bring in those young engineers. We focused on those two ends of the spectrum, and I think that's what's made us successful.
Are you at all concerned about the impact of reductions in research grants, the curtailing of programs at some universities, not to mention the fact that many people in STEM fields are now looking to work overseas?
Well, I see actually lots of investment in STEM careers. We in particular have many of our investments go towards STEM fields, so I don't see that as a problem. I see the research opportunities in the universities are aligned with the technologies that I believe are important. So I think the investment in the right technologies is as important.
Amy Gowder, President and CEO of GE Aerospace Defense and Systems, thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for this event. Appreciate it. And now let me introduce Adam Smith, Congressman, Democrat from the state of Washington and the ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Thanks for being here. So, Congressman, let me start with a very broad question here. In your mind, how urgent is the need for innovation in the military sector?
Well, it's unbelievably urgent right now. A, because we face a ton of very complicated adversaries. Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, various different terrorist groups, all of which are now to some degree working together for different reasons. So the threat is profound. And the rapid pace of change on the battlefield, we're seeing it in Ukraine, we've seen it in a number of places where fights have broken out. Drones, secure communications, it's this rapidly evolving battle to see who can secure their information the best and make vulnerable their adversaries. Innovation is absolutely crucial to what we're doing, more so than I think at any time in the history of warfare. And at the same time, the Pentagon is poorly constructed to innovate quickly. And there's a lot that could be said about that.
Well, expand a little bit on that, if you would.
Yeah, well, I think the best summary I've ever seen of it was someone wrote a foreign affairs article over a year ago now that said that the DoD was designed to be the Ford Motor Company in the 1950s, and it needs to be Apple in 2022. So maybe this was 2 or 3 years ago that the article was written. Then the Ford Motor Company back in the 50s was process. We're doing the same thing over and over again. You know, how can we do the same thing really well, really quickly, not how can we change and iterate. And sort of you've had this calcifying effect move in around that. And then there's 3 pieces to it. One, the Pentagon itself is very focused on process, requirements, doing things by the book as opposed to innovating and coming up with creative solutions. So the culture, the regulations are wrong, the requirements process is a nightmare. I remember meeting with guys who were working on remodeling, refurbishing an LCS, and the guy who was responsible for painting the portion of the ship that was below the waterline said there were 1,200 pages of requirements for how to do that. So the Pentagon's in a bad place. Congress likes to micromanage, and we also like to take care of our own districts. So we don't want the Pentagon to be free to make mistakes and to innovate. And if they make a mistake, we're going to haul them before Congress and yell at them and make a point of it. And then lastly, industry, as we've consolidated down to the big 5, industry is very comfortable with that process because they can figure out how to make the requirements process work. They can get a 14-year contract and keep getting paid. So there are all these elements that sort of conspire against the type of rapid change that we need.
There's been a lot of talk about the deterioration of the defense industrial base. How do we revive it? How do we reinvent it? And how critical is that to the innovation mission?
Yeah, these are the 2 things, the biggest priorities that Chairman Rogers and I completely share. And the committee, I think, is very focused on this. We have 2 very clear priorities. One is to speed up the acquisition process and enable the Pentagon to innovate along the lines of your first question. 2 is how do we produce at scale what we need? Because that's what we've seen as, you know, with the war in Ukraine, the war in the Middle East. We've needed a lot more basic ammunition, missiles, drones, and all of that. And we have not been able to simply turn on the production capacity as quickly as possible. So those are the 2 biggest things we need to do. How do we do it? One key part of this is partners and allies. The United States of America is not going to be able to do this on their own.
But a bit of an issue at the current moment. Our partners and allies are a little bit irritated with us right now.
I'm sorry, I don't know what you're referring to. Is there some problem? Yeah, no, I mean, look, all kidding aside, that is a central piece of the problem. And this is one of many things that President Trump is just 100% wrong about. And in this particular case, how wrong he is incredibly dangerous. He paints this picture that basically for the last 80 years, the United States of America has been getting screwed. The whole rest of the world has taken advantage of us, which the rest of the world looks at and says, well, let me get this straight. You have the most powerful military, the most prosperous economy in the history of the world. We are, I think, roughly 4% of the world's population. We're responsible for 20% of consumption, and you're getting screwed? That's his way of looking at it. Now, there's one very important caveat here. We have not had a problem in the United States of America generating wealth at a record pace, in any reasonable expectation for a major power in this world. The problem we've had is that wealth has been concentrated in too few hands. We've got too many people who are struggling economically to make it, while we have, 1%, somewhere between 1 and 20% of the population that is having an unbelievable amount of wealth. But this notion that the world order that we put in place after World War II has screwed us is just completely wrong. And so now we're busily alienating all of these countries all across the world. And one other key point about this, and Trump made this point better than I could ever possibly make it yesterday when he bragged for an extended period of time about the main result of the tariffs in his mind is that he's got all these countries in the world kissing his ass. And make no mistake about it, you can look at all the math formulas in the world, you can study all these obscure Mar-a-Lago economic theories, and, well, they're doing it because of this. No, they're doing it for one reason, because Donald Trump wants people to kiss his ass. He wants all the countries of the world to have to come to him. He wants all you business people desperate for an exemption from some tariff to come to him. He wants all those people who are desperate to keep their jobs to come to him. It's about power, his personal power. So yes, it is alienating the rest of the world at a very, very bad moment.
So let me bring it back to the defense industrial base. If we are not going to have the kind of cooperation with partners and allies that we have in the past, how do we revive it? And how do we develop a workforce that has the competencies that we need?
Well, the first thing is going to be really difficult. I mean, frankly, the only way we're going to begin to turn that around is if some portion of the Trump-supporting public stands up and says, hey, not what we wanted. And by the way, I mean, I can certainly have sympathy that people had concerns about the Democratic Party and some of the things that we were doing that made them turn to Trump. I'm not going to walk down that road because it's really complicated. I get that. But this, I mean, is this really what all the people who supported Trump are rooting for? So to change that, that's going to have to happen. And that's going to be difficult. As long as he's in power, he's going to keep alienating our allies and partners. And it's a real problem because we'd begun to make some progress here. The AUKUS deal is a beautiful thing. It's not primarily about building submarines. It's about the partnership between Australia, the UK, and the US to develop technologies, to develop production capacity. We've got Australia making gimbalers now, helping us produce those things. You can turn on sort of the arsenal of democracy, but not in one country. We have 53 nations who are working together to defend Ukraine. Those 53 nations have production capacity. We can work with them in a way to get to our volume. And yes, we can also do more domestically here in the US and prioritize it, but it's going to take more than one country.
What policies specifically is your committee working on that would support the development of cutting-edge technologies and their adoption by the military?
Well, speeding up the acquisition process, and we've gotten a lot of different ideas about how we can give the Pentagon greater freedom to make decisions more rapidly. Other transactional authority expanded, basically, to empower them to make those decisions more quickly.
And in your view, what are the biggest challenges facing the U.S. military that you believe innovation could help solve?
Well, the biggest challenge, and I struggle for how to explain this, warfare now is always about, can you see them, can they see you? And that's one of the beauty of drones. They're hard to see. You can swarm them, do a whole bunch of different things. Now they are jammable, and then you got to come up with new ways to make them unjammable. But think about the Black Sea situation. So the Russians have this massive fleet. Ukraine doesn't even have a navy. And yet, Russia cannot use their navy in the Black Sea because Ukraine innovated and developed some one-way attack surface drones that took them totally out of the game. So that's the challenge. I mean, primarily warfare is about massing firepower and getting it to the to where you want it to be quickly. Well, now you can mass all of that firepower, get it to a place quickly, and I don't know, $50,000 drone can sink it or shoot it out of the sky or whatever. So it's secure communications, it's protecting the assets that you have and figuring out a new way to deliver firepower, understanding that mass is now as much a disadvantage as an advantage in many instances.
Time's of the essence, correct?
Oh, I think so. I mean, I don't know. They always say now is not the time to panic. I've yet come across
It's not?
the time to panic, primarily because panic never helps you. Look, I mean, there certainly have been more urgent situations in our history. No one has directly attacked us recently. But I think you have to look out at the way the world is shifting. And there is a consolidated group of folks out there that have one shared goal, and that is to weaken the United States of America because they perceive us as a threat to their interests. And that's Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, the crink, I guess we settled on. I was pushing the cringe, but I lost that fight. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and global extremist groups. They all want us weaker, and the reason they want us weaker is so that they can have more freedom of movement wherever they are in the world. Iran doesn't like us being there to help defend Israel. China doesn't like us being there to help defend the Philippines when they're battling over all that. Russia sure as hell doesn't like us in Eastern Europe. They want to weaken us to push us out. And they are as consolidated and as good at that as they've ever been. And just to come back to the partners and allies point, if we need partners and allies, and if all these other countries are trying to gather against us, all right, China now has a whole bunch more friends. They got 100 different countries who are like, well, we can't do business with the U.S. I mean, we used to work on this. The Rahm Emanuel had a big pitch on trying to go after Chinese economic coercion, that this was a problem. We had all these countries out in the world, and China would basically use their economic power to force these countries into political positions that we didn't want them in. So we wanted to go to these countries and say, we will be a safe haven from China's economic coercion. Now, we're the country doing the economic coercion. So what are those countries are going to do? They're going to look for their own safe haven. And that safe haven is the BRICS. It's China and those countries that are developing an alternative economic system so that they're not having to deal with Donald Trump making them kiss his ass. So it's a huge problem that we're pushing all of these countries away precisely at the moment in the last 80 years when we have most needed more friends.
Congressman, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Congressman Adam Smith.
And now we have another member of Congress joining us for a different perspective. We have with us Congressman Tom Cole, Republican from Oklahoma and chairman of the House Appropriations Committee. Nice to see you. Great to have you with us. So, I have to admit, first off, appropriations not my strong suit. But I've talked to a couple of very smart people in that. Don't tell us that. Don't tell us that. So DOD is expected to come back with their recommendations for 25. Any sense of what that's going to look like and what part innovation is going to play in their recommendations? And what if it doesn't align with what you have laid out?
Well, I would suspect, quite frankly, we will be pretty close to where the administration is going to be. We're expecting what's called a skinny budget for the overall budget by the end of the month. That's what OMB is committed to us. I would expect the Senate budget to look a lot different. We'll go through a normal appropriations process. I judge President Trump really based on the first term. He was very robust when it came to making sure there would be a strong America. I think if I remember correctly, his first defense budget was $54 billion higher than the previous fiscal year. We ended up actually $80 billion higher. And So I think he will actually lean forward on the defense side. The problem will be in the other areas of the budget where he'll expect us to extract significant savings. But again, we'll wait and see. We've got a new SecDef that, frankly, I've talked to on one occasion, but I don't know well. The president has the ability to surprise. So let's just wait and see what he puts out in front of us.
Any forecast for what a 26 budget might look like?
I think, again, I was really referring more to 26 and 25. 25 is already cooked. I mean, we're sitting here operating in a CR. It's a little bit higher than originally proposed, but not as robust as I would like. We'd be better off coming to a deal, so to speak. But again, we'll get the president's budget, go from there. I can assure you we will have out the defense portion of that before the August break out of committee. And then it'll be a leadership decision. Do we move it across the floor? Last year we were able to do that. That's actually a big difference between the two parties. We're usually able to move the defense bill on our own if we need to. That's not true on the Democratic side. They have to have Republican votes to, frankly, ever get it passed out of the House. So gives us a lot of leverage, honestly, whether we're in the minority or in the majority, because we can operate independently in the majority, and they can't operate independently when they're in the majority.
When it comes to military innovation, we can't fund everything. In your view, what should the priorities be?
I probably should have had Ken Calvert here because he's our chairman of the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee, a guy that I honestly trust and depend on, and Adam Sullivan. My personal priorities, probably number one, looking at Ukraine. We've got to get really serious about drone warfare going forward. It's changing the nature of that. Second, modernization. I represent Tinker Air Force Base, and I can tell you maintaining 50 and 60-year-old airframes is not a way to have indefinite air dominance. So bringing on some new systems, new aircraft, very important for us there. Obviously, B-21 bomber, very important now that the decision's been made on the new F-47. To move ahead robustly. Very important to replace a really aging AWACS fleet, moving from an E3 to an E7. So those are some of my personal priorities, and I think all of us are very worried about the Western Pacific. So, picking up shipbuilding capacity, enormously important.
Have you got any concerns about the budget cutting now being conducted by DOGE and whether it's going to impact military innovation?
I found them actually pretty easy to work with. I have a heavy federal district. My district's number 16 out of 435, and most of those are civilian defense personnel at Tinker Air Force Base and Fort Sill. And there were all kinds of worries and rumors about that. Stories in the local press. There's going to be hundreds of layoffs at Tinker Air Force Base. I talked to the commanding general 2 weeks ago. There'd been one. That's out of over 16,000 defense employees. And when we've had incidents that involved, honestly, non-defense areas, things like the National Weather Center, which is also in my district, or a large Social Security office, when we got in touch with them and explained, okay, this is the reasons why your decision, we think, does not make sense, we were successful in that. And a lot of other members have been. You just simply have to engage. I had the opportunity to meet on one occasion with Elon Musk. I can tell you two things about him. He likes to smoke cigars and he likes bourbon. So we got along great. We established the basis of
and he likes innovation too.
Yeah, absolutely. But no, I mean, he said, look, Congressman, we're going to move pretty fast and we're going to make mistakes. But if you'll bring the mistakes to our attention, we will correct the mistakes. That's been my experience thus far. So I'm not too worried about it. The big protection for us in Oklahoma, to be parochial, is, again, the importance of the missions we have at Tinker and at Vance Air Force Base and Altus Air Force Base, McAllister, Ammunition Depot. Those things and the workforces behind them actually speak for themselves in terms of quality. So we've lost fewer than 100 workers across the entire state at all our federal installations so far, and the recommendations don't look particularly threatening to us.
Perhaps you've had an influence because you're chairman of the Appropriations Committee.
Well, that's been suggested. But actually, I don't think accurately. There were over 100 sites slated for closure by DOGE that were pulled back from the list. And if you look at them, they're all over the country, and they're in Democratic as well as Republican districts. The difficulty of dealing with DOGE is, number one, we know what to do. Every congressional office knows what to do if they got a problem in an established department. I mean, we got a problem with defense. I'm not calling the Secretary of Defense. We're calling the Legislative Liaison Office, and we work it through usually at the staff level. DOGE is new, so people don't know who to call, how to get there, and you really do have to work it. But most of the issues we've had have been resolved at staff level. That's been my experience. And again, I think of my friend Senator Lujan in New Mexico scored some big decisions, and we were good friends in the House, did a lot of work on Native American issues together. So he's a guy I like a lot, and even though we disagree philosophically, but again, I saw him being successful in working with it. So I don't think you have to be a Republican or in a powerful position. You just have to have a good staff and work the system. And if you can defend the case, then you do all right.
I don't think there's anybody who would dispute the fact that efficiencies could be brought to government. Do you have specific suggestions on how to make defense dollars go further?
Frankly, I don't think there's enough defense dollars, so I want to use them in a better way. And I think actually DOD's done some excellent things in the way of innovation. There's a lot of things we ought to be buying commercially that we're not doing, and I think there's a lot of money to be saved there. I think advanced manufacturing could really enhance the efficiencies in our industrial base and bring down the cost quite a bit. And frankly, marrying up industry ever closer with our depots, which is a process I see happening, usually brings some pretty good savings as well.
How do you foster more collaboration between the private sector and government, military specifically?
Well, I think, number one, DOD has to realize that it's not always dealing with primes, in terms of contractor or people with deep pockets.
Particularly when it comes to innovation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, these are small. So you've got to be a lot more aggressive about providing support, and you've got to turn things around a lot faster. They don't have the resources to sit there and wait and maintain their workforces and their technical capabilities. And we've seen some things. I mean, that have been good that Congress has, in collaboration with the Pentagon, done a good job at. The Office of Strategic Capital, you see the loan capacity having increased almost fourfold in the last 2 or 3 years, or the Defense Innovation Unit. You've gone from like $112 million budget 2 or 3 years ago to pushing $800 million in 25, probably go up again. And all that is designed to try and, number one, bring smaller firms in and firms that are more nimble, quite frankly, and that are used to thinking in terms of efficiencies as opposed to a bottomless pit of money, because we certainly don't have that.
Congressman, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
Congressman Don Cole, thank you. And speaking of the Defense Innovation Unit, next up we have Liz Young-McNally, who's Deputy Director of Commercial Operations in the DIU. Hi, so nice to see you.
Good morning, nice to see you too.
Great. Well, we've had a couple of statements made here today that I bet you're going to contest. One of them is that the Department of Defense is not structured for innovation. How do you respond to that?
I think the department has done a number of different things. Well, first of all, it's wonderful to see everyone. Good morning. I would say it's a work in progress, right? So I don't think I would completely disagree with that. I think the department continues to take a number of different steps, DIU being one of them, to help ensure that we're able to innovate with speed and scale much faster to bring commercial dual-use technology in. But ultimately, the entire department has to innovate. So, we're going to have to continue to innovate on what is the right structures to ensure the innovation happens, especially in an organization as massive and complicated as the U.S. Department of Defense is.
Someone also mentioned that they think innovation should be bottom up rather than top down. Is that something you subscribe to?
I think it needs to be both. Innovation has to be both, as well as sort of lateral and backward and forward. It's in all the different ways. If I take DIU as an example and the process we use, just to sort of help describe the bottom up, top down, left, right, and sideways, we're constantly working with combatant commanders to understand at their level what are their needs. We're also getting signals from everywhere else. There's a bunch of military people or people like me who are veterans who still have, friends who are in the military. So we're getting lots of bottom up and sort of brigade commander level signals, right? Sort of like mid and senior level officer signals as well. So that's happening. We're out there tech scouting at all times to understand what's happening, again, at the CEO level, but then at the bottom level of the engineer, working on something interesting and new. And then we're working with the services so that when we identify a potential problem and what the right technology is there a way that we're going to scale that? So I think that's an example of, at the same time, you're working bottom up, top down, and all the different ways to get all the different inputs together to align on what do we want to work on and ensure that at the back end of what we work on, assuming it's successful, there is going to be a way to scale that into the department.
What technologies is DIU prioritizing right now?
We have 7 different technology areas. I mean, I think apropos to the fact that there's so much going on, so we're prioritizing across all of those. The areas that we focus on are...
Is that the right approach, to prioritize across 7 different areas?
I think when you think about how many different needs the Department of Defense has and how many different areas where commercial technology can help to change it, you have to do that. So we've got AI, ML, autonomy, energy, human systems, space, cyber and telecom, and emerging technology. I think to your question, there are themes across all of those areas. When I look across all 7 of those technology areas, AI, while it's its own area, infuses everything. We're thinking across all of those areas, how are we really thinking about the multi-domain environment from the bottom of the seabed up to space and everything in between? How are we doing that at the edge and in like a very complicated communications environment? So those are some sort of thematic areas, but we're doing it across all of those technology areas.
What are some of the obstacles or challenges when you're innovating? We've heard today about acquisition being a problem. We've heard about aversion to risk-taking being part of the picture. What do you see as the biggest impediments?
I think both of those are true, right? We need to continue to align the right incentives so that people take and feel empowered to take the right amounts of risk. We need to continue to evolve the acquisition system. Some of what Congressman Cole was talking about previously in terms of new authorities that they've given to DIU as an example on agile fielding and more flexibility in funding. As long as we continue to help show transparency towards that, I think we're hopeful that something like that will scale. I think it's also complicated to break out of the silos and just ensure, like what I was talking about in the last answer, across all of those different pieces you're coordinating. The good news is that there's lots of energy for this. There's lots of talent that wants to get after it. But I think we're still at this place. I had an old boss who used to talk about being a 4-star action officer, right? He would have to sort of like personally get involved and make something happen. I feel like we're still in a place in the department where there's a lot of 4-star action officers that have to get involved. The good news is that there's more and more of them every day who want to make that happen. But we have to get to a place where there doesn't have to be a 4-star action officer, right? That the entire system is enabled and empowered. And so I'm hopeful, things like Secretary Hegseth's recent memo on software acquisition, doing that using CSOs, OTs, elements like that are all parts of these changes that we need in order to get after it.
So can you change fast enough?
We're trying as best we can.
And can you scale? Because you're a relatively small entity within this enormous bureaucracy. Can you bring change across the entire enterprise?
I think in combination with many partners in the Department of Defense and in other places, we're working to scale that impact. I mean, to your point, as much as DIU's budget has grown, it's still under $1 billion, which is, a tiny, tiny piece in the grand scheme of things. So for us to really be able to scale, ultimately that has to scale into programs of record in the services. That's starting to happen, but more has to happen. And And quite frankly, it's going to happen to keep the defense tech ecosystem excited as well, because ultimately they need to see that demand signal, and we need to start buying more of this type of technology.
What is your relationship with the private sector? How tight is it? How much collaboration and cooperation is there?
I mean, we're constantly, the reason, if I take a step back, the reason DIU was formed 10 years ago is because that collaboration had frayed, right? I think we're in a very different place now than we were 10 years ago, thanks to DIU, but many
are
others.
we where we need to be?
I think we're in a pretty good space in terms of how we're communicating. I've got a team underneath me whose sole job is to be the commercial executive in each of those technology areas, constantly talking to companies, scouting what's going on, talking to funders. I want to continue to figure out how we can get even better at sharing the demand signal with all of them of what's coming, so that we can even better align private capital with where we're going, and so that the US government can take advantage of all the private capital outside in that investment in R&D. So I'm hopeful that we'll continue to make progress there.
What would you say are some of DIU's big wins?
I think in terms of like individual technology, so the biggest win that we talk about are the prototypes that we're doing actually, ultimately getting into production contracts and changing how we fight. So there's a number of those. I'm happy to go into examples of those. So that's the core of what we do. I think the other types of wins is how we're helping to innovate across the department. So something like the SWP memo that Secretary Hegseth signed is an example of how now we're taking the CSO, which DIU pioneered, and then bringing that across the department.
So you have some private sector people in the room right now. Where would you like to see them concentrate their efforts in a way that would complement what you're trying to do?
I think to continue to have dialogue with each other in terms of what are the key technology areas. I love it when funders come to us or new companies come to us saying this is an area that we're working on. I think continuing to look in particular at commercial solutions that already exist and how can we adopt them into the Department of Defense. If I can give one example, just because we're at an aerospace event, we recently shared the work that we're doing on air logistics optimization, right? So totally not sexy, but there's lots of work going in to coordinate all the different air assets and what's happening. And how do we do that to reduce the number of empty planes, to do it so that we're saving more fuel, so that we're saving money, et cetera. And while the military was doing that, there's lots of really great commercial players doing that even better when you think about Amazon or anything else that we use for logistics. So we worked with the Navy, the Air Force, and Transcom and to bring that in. And C3AI and Google are actually now on production contracts. So that's a great example of, where can we scout and find commercial technology? The department should just use that technology and adapt it for the department. We should not create something bespoke on our own.
So you've worked in a number of different sectors. Curious as to how optimistic you are about whether the military can innovate enough and innovate fast enough and scale it large enough to truly take the military where it needs to be.
So look, I know we can do it. And the reason I say that is because, I spent my 20s as a young officer in the US Army in the period of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. And I had, the opportunity to see how we were able to change how we fought and how we were able to transform the military for coin, and how, being a 4-star action officer, Secretary Gates got those MRAPs in to save troops' lives, as an example. So I know we can do it. I think the question is, are we going to bring the same urgency right now? Because we're not in Iraq or we're not in Afghanistan in the same way. So I know we can do it. We just have to do it.
So the urgency doesn't exist right now because we're not in conflict?
I think we need to just sort of continue to ensure that we bring that urgency.
Wonderful. Liz Young-McNally, thanks so much for joining us from the Defense Innovation Unit.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Please welcome back to the stage Steve Clemons, Editor-at-Large, The National Interest.
Greetings, and I'm going to welcome to the stage Pat Fallon, member of Congress, member of the Armed Services Committee of Texas. We've just been chatting on the sidelines about a lot of stuff, and I just want to remind people he was in the U.S. Air Force. He was an officer. He was stationed at Shepherd Air Force Base, which happens to be the only base I just learned, which is a shared NATO base, so we might touch on that.
Okay, yeah.
But look, this morning what we've been talking about, and I don't know if we've gotten fully where we need to be, is the kind of, discussing defense innovation, discussing what we're doing. I want to ask you, why does the Pentagon need, why is it vital to become a much more, particularly with defense technology, a much more innovative player in this national security place? What's the why?
That's a great question, because we have to really think about and keep our all eyes on China. We had this luxury of being the only superpower for decades. I remember when I think it was 1980, and it was Thanksgiving. I was at my uncle's, and you recall, for the folks of a certain age, that when you were the remote, when you had to go and change the channel, and you physically went up there and changed the channel, and my sons don't realize that TVs used to be this thick.
Yeah.
You know, they think they're always on the wall. And
Sure.
But there was a program on PBS, and they said, this is 1980, that China wanted to be a superpower. That was their goal by 2025. They
And it was
actually
a
had a
joke.
plan. Yeah, it was a joke. It was laughable. China, I mean, they're just getting over the Cultural Revolution and Mao, and then that hangover, and millions being killed and starved. They were 5-10 years early. So if we don't do this, we will be a second-rate power. We do not have that luxury any longer.
So they clearly focused on what they were doing. They had goals and reasons, and we've been hearing a lot of times that they wanted to displace America as the sort of leading hegemon in the world. What do you think has to be removed as far as speed bumps or done in things like procurement or technology? How do you get focus back on that goal from your perspective in the U.S. national security ecosystem?
Well, like in general, and then with specificity, right? In general, we're all talking about DOGE. We had a couple of workshops, town halls, if you will, in our district. And we asked folks if they liked DOGE.
How'd they go for you?
They didn't like it. It was good. There's a way in which you can do it to kind of control things, and also allow that dissent. I welcome the dissent. And in fact, at the end of the town halls, we had about 20 minutes left, and I literally said this on stage. I said, all right, so we're going to take questions directly from the audience. They were writing them down before, and I took a whole load of them. I said, but we're going to do it as quickly as possible, but here's the requirements. I want you to, one, only ask a question if you have never voted for me before, if you never will vote for me, and you think I'm a political son of a bitch. And 30% of the audience, hands went up. I'm like, you just self-identified. And then ask those questions back and forth. But the point is, whether they liked or didn't like DOGE, 98% of them have heard of it.
Right.
It's about efficiency, and this is what we're talking about here, is efficiency. And with specificity, going from, when you're talking about accounting principles, going from CAS to GAAP. I mean, so languages we can speak. We want to make it easier. We need to make it. We have to. We must.
So that's in procurement.
Yeah, for procurement, and then expanding OTAs would be another really good idea. That was innovative, and we need to be bold. We're watching the Ukrainian battlefield and seeing how things are changing. We cannot get stuck in fighting yesterday's wars. We have to fight tomorrow's.
Could we do what the Ukrainians have done? I mean, to put short form, Ukrainians have digitized their battlefield, synthesized intelligence in real time, and done things with even autonomous systems that the Pentagon right now can't even touch.
Right.
So what if we had that kind of conflict ourselves? Would we be able to do it?
Necessity is the mother of invention, and you have to. When I was in the Air Force 30 years ago, we weren't even talking about air superiority because we were talking about air supremacy. We had it. And I always thought that would be, because that's the world I grew up in, that would be the case. And then I get this job, and I'm in an Armed Services Committee hearing, and they were talking about we don't have air superiority anymore. And I was shocked that I asked the general, I said, what? It's because of the UAVs. I mean, it just changed things fundamentally. And think about a drone swarm. How are you going to combat that? Are we ready for that? We're not, and we need to.
Does AI help get us back to supremacy?
Possibly, if we use it the right way, and because China's going to, we have to put some protective guardrails on there, but we need to embrace it. We need to embrace technology.
So Pat, take your, important member of Congress hat off for a minute. You've also been an
Have
entrepreneur.
I ever had that hat?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, you're great. I just want to basically, say, hey, you're an entrepreneur. You're out there. You want to work in the national security space. You want to interact with the Pentagon. I'm just sort of interested from, taking our, self-serious DC roles off for a minute as we're interacting with people who can contribute and into the innovation base. What does that person need? What do we need to do to create better partnerships between government, the Pentagon, and that private sector entrepreneur?
I think that,
and you're the entrepreneur.
Okay. Well, any entrepreneur that's in the audience will know that there was a time, regardless of what field you're in, that when you were embarking on a new venture, that say 3-4 months deep, you were staying up all night calculating when you were going to go broke. And when I talk in Chamber of Commerce meetings, there's always these head nods because they know I lived that as well, because you don't know. But being an entrepreneur is about calculated risk. I've been fortunate at about 70% of the things that I tried worked. But because they were calculated risks. And then I had to also factor in, if it doesn't work, what's the financial hit? And if I can absorb that, then I'll take that risk. And we need to do that, but by on the government side, rewarding that calculated risk and that innovation and providing those incentives. And that's like some of the innovation, the defense innovation that we have, and some of the programs, the DIEUs that will do that in that partnership. When we find these promising technologies, let's leap on them, fund them, and get them to scale.
We did a dinner last night. I wish all of you had been there, and I guess it was off the record, so I won't, completely violate all the terms. But it was a really fascinating discussion, and our friends at GE Aerospace hosted it. But it was really a very edgy, multi-pronged discussion about how AI was going to change so much, from materials that are used in engines, which you've got set up in this room back here. You kind of go see all the, the engines and dimensions of it and the various aircraft that they've been part of. But when you kind of look at air warfare, you talk about air supremacy, you talk about the systems we're running, you talk about systems integration. And I'm just wondering whether the system that we have now, as you're interacting with the Trump administration, senior officials that are getting appointed, is there a hunger and appetite to make that jump into something much more complex?
I think there is. And you think about like with the Navy and aircraft carriers, and you wonder, are we ever even going to build another one? Seriously, because they're so...
That was a huge part of the discussion last night.
Yeah, because they're very expensive, obviously, and they're easier to kill now. And it's those hypersonic missiles that the Chinese have, they're like bullets, and those bullets can kill the carriers. When it costs a few million to kill billions, you have to do those calculations and reforms, and then how do you counter that threat? And for that matter, and the Air Force is going to hate me for saying this, but you're going to have a lot more unmanned aircraft. And how many more sophisticated manned aircraft are we going to build? It's clearly going to be reduced from what we're used to.
Is the Air Force going to call? We got a lot of Air Force people. Are they going to call you and say, "Congressman, you just went off, off course"?
I'm not telling you. Yes, they probably will. But, I'm not talking about tomorrow or even 5 years from now. But what is, like I just took that example I used with China? That was a 50-year vision. What does warfare not only look like clearly exactly tomorrow or in a year or 5 years, but what is it going to look like in 25 to 50 years?
Look, it's something I don't think we've gotten into deeply today, which is also on my radar, is across the board. I met a really global leading AI CEO recently, and I just said, look, what's your up at night issue? And he goes, copper. He says, copper. We need a lot of copper. You look at data centers, you look at, this coming wave of infrastructure investment. We just did a big, partnership with NVIDIA and Dell, they're also part of the national security technology apparatus. We can kind of look at that world. You look at GE, you look at the various aerospace, the things that they're doing. Critical materials and minerals are another big, great race right now. And my question to you is, where is that on the dashboard? And is that part of this equation that we need to get right? You're sitting down in Texas, which is another, superpower when it comes to some of this. But people tell me we're in our own way in a lot of the dimensions of what we need to do to become the kind of superpower in the critical materials race to get a lot of this right.
When you get into the political realm, a lot of things don't make sense because it's emotional and it's not logic, right? We need critical minerals, we need rare earth minerals, but we have a lot of them here in our country. We just then, with these folks that will talk out of both sides of their mouth, yes, we need these things, but we're going to get them from China, but we have them here. But then they say, well, we're not going to let you mine them because you'll hurt the environment. We live on a planet together, and the United States is not its own. It's a nation state, but it's not a planet. So when you're talking about these things, why don't we? We have these resources. We also have an environmental lobby that's very powerful. We have an independent judiciary, and we actually care because we are a functioning republic. So when we're going to extract those kind of rare earth minerals, we'll do it in the right way. Communist Chinese, or communists as a whole, whether they're Russian, Chinese, or whoever, they don't necessarily care all that much. I don't think Stalin cared about his environmental lobby. And his folks.
Last question, since you used to, hang out with a lot of NATO folks on this, air base before you became a member of Congress. Are we leaving NATO?
No, and that's hyperbolic and that's silly.
I'm just asking a question. I'm not being
hyperbolic. But it's a great question because a lot of folks are being hyperbolic about it. President Trump sometimes does it with, bluntly, but let's look at NATO. I've talked to the administration, cabinet level, And all of them say, of course, it's the most successful military alliance in history. We're not leaving. What we want to do, make sure of, is everybody carries their water, carries their weight. In 2014, NATO said, hey, we're all going to spend at least 2% of our GDP on defense. At that time, there were 25 NATO countries. Only 3 of them were doing that. And then they dragged their feet. Now, I won't use any names. I'll just give you their initials. Germany, Canada, Spain, Italy. Germany, 3rd largest economy, and there's more artillery pieces in Finland, 5.5 million people, than there are in Germany, 85 million people.
Right.
And when the Germans do set their mind to getting it together militarily, they're rather good at it. I'm not saying that their governments at the time were the best in the world, obviously, but they didn't do that. And then we have the Ukrainian war. So the question I asked the Secretary General of NATO when I went over there in 2023 was, if everyone had followed through their commitments in 2014, do you think, and we'll never know for sure, but do you think Vladimir Putin would have invaded Ukraine?
This is Stoltenberg.
Yeah.
And what did he say?
He said, it would be a lot less likely. We'll never know.
He said it would be a lot less likely.
Yeah, and namely Germany. I mean, they're the big dog.
Right.
France and Britain were always kind of right at that 2%.
Right.
But if Europe had taken their defense more seriously, then we don't know if it would have happened, but it certainly would have increased the deterrent. And then when you look at the expenditures, the closer you get to Russia, the higher the expenditures are. All the Baltic states, Poland's going to go over 4%, which is more than we're doing percentage-wise. Finland can field 800,000 in the field, so they claim, with a 5.5 million person population, which is remarkable. Even if it's half, that's remarkable. But then you go that way, and you can see the Italy, the Spain, Canada at 1%. And now I know Ireland is not in NATO, but when you went to Ireland, that country, 5.5 million people, okay, but Finland's right there. Ireland's as far away as you can get in Europe from Russia. They can't, they field 7,400 people. They have no surface radar and 2 boats. You get enough Guinness in you could take over the damn country. I mean.
Well, listen, I have about an hour's worth more questions with you, so we're going to have a date again in the future. I really appreciate your candor being with us today. Please give a round of applause to Congressman Pat Fallon, Armed Services Committee. Thank you so much, Pat. Great to see you. Thanks so much.
Thank you all.
Please welcome to the stage Vago Muradian, founder and editor, Defense and Aerospace Report.
Everybody, thanks very much for joining us today. It's my honor to be here and to moderate this august panel in a luxurious 19 minutes and 56 seconds. The whole focus of this is we're in an era. First, I want to thank Amy and the entire GE team and Steve and his team for the terrific job they're doing. And our goal is to talk a little bit about the future. Alex Ovechkin, the Caps great, is now the highest all-time scorer, and he did that by skating to where the puck's going to be instead of being where the puck is. And I thought this is a terrific opportunity to go through the line with all of you. Just real quick, Darren DiTomaso is with General Electric, Brian Chung is with Palantir, Steve Schmidt is with Sikorsky, and Dr. Chris Likens is with Kratos. So that's it for the introductions. Darren, I want to start with you. Your CEO is a man who's always said, I'd rather invest more than invest less, which is one of the reasons why I think GE has differentiated itself in the market. You guys are involved in everything, obviously, from jet engines, from the very first jet engine. Everybody celebrates 1 year for GE. I would note the company is also from 1892 and has a heritage of innovation, including the first jet engine and many other firsts. From your guys' standpoint, you're on high-temperature electronics, hypersonics, materials, aside from engines. As you look into that deep future, where are you investing? Where is this capability going? What does the future of flight look like from your perspective and where you guys are putting investment?
Yeah, Vago, I think I'd frame the discussion in really 3 areas. It's the propulsion system itself, and then power generation, distribution control, and then avionics and mission systems. And we see the future in defense going significantly in each of those 3 areas. So we're investing significantly in each of those 3 areas. If we think about the traditional propulsion systems, the jet engine, if you will, There's a combination of things. There's speed in terms of hypersonics. We're heavily invested in technologies there. Amy mentioned rotating detonation. We think we have some unique concepts there that really make that extremely attractive in terms of hypersonics. And then with a more typical jet engine, things like adaptive cycles, which allows you to get thrust and acceleration and efficiency. Used to be an or, you would get thrust and acceleration or efficiency. You can think of that as range. Now we can get both. The other piece of that, I would say, in terms of those traditional systems, is materials. Amy mentioned that too. I have an example here. This is a ceramic matrix component. This part goes in the heart of the jet engine where the temperatures run thousands of degrees. This is 1/3 the weight of a metal part, and it has a lot more temperature capability. So that materials piece is a significant investment that we've made over the years. And there's other aspects of materials in terms of survivability. And in the power world, we talk about aircraft electrification and propulsion electrification. Aircraft electrification is providing electric throughout the aircraft. Propulsion electrification is something we're partnered with Steve on in terms of hybrid electric. Jet engines designed to be very efficient at certain cruise conditions. It's not very efficient in other conditions. And we can bring the electric piece into that equation to make it more efficient in areas where it's traditionally not. And then when we talk about avionics and mission systems, Amy mentioned modular open systems architectures where it's a plug and play, sort of like an iPhone concept where you have the hardware, the firmware, but then different providers can come to the table and bring software applications.
I also want to give a shout out. So this CMC technology, GE has a proprietary vapor infusion process, if I'm getting this correct, because I visited upstate New York, and you guys can turn that into almost a 5,000 degree material, right, which has hypersonic applications.
Correct, that's right.
Which is pretty neat. Let me ask, and in part because you are our host, but also having covered capital markets for a long time, for a while, GE's industrial infrastructure was seen as a negative, right? I mean, guys on the street were like, hey, this is overhead and it's too expensive, and there are other ways to sort of outsource it. How are you guys drawing on some of these facilities that are really unique? I mean, your upstate New York facility is just kind of a jewel in many respects. How are all of these facilities actually helping you in this technological race?
In several aspects, our research facility in Niskayuna really brings a lot of hardcore scientific research and development that we translate into product application. The other aspect I would say is, besides those research facilities, is our test facilities. A lot of these test facilities are really national assets. And so investing in those facilities is incredibly important, not just for GE, but for the DoD and our customers, because it brings the ability to test these different propulsion systems in a sea level environment, but simulate altitude environments and simulate high Mach speeds.
And seeing your rotating detonation engine also was pretty neat up there. Brian, you're on the AI side, right? So as much as General Electric is investing in its own future, it's also investing in the partnerships that it has with each of you. Talk to us a little bit about AI technology now. Once upon a time, mysterious. Now everybody is an AI expert suddenly. But also the game is changing, right? I mean, the DeepSeeks of the world, the Mistrals are showing that you don't necessarily have to be capitalized at the tens of billions of dollars. You can be small and be agile and efficient. You guys are synonymous with the technology, and your market value has reflected that. At this point, you're older than GE Aerospace is, so you're the heritage guy in this equation. Ha ha ha. Walk us through what that roadmap looks like and where this technology is going to be, given how quickly it's changing, and how you guys are changing your investment to make sure you stay ahead of the power curve.
Yeah, for sure. And you're absolutely right. It's very exciting because this is all very new. Right? We've been in this game for a while, like you mentioned, but the thing that's really interesting is the ubiquity of the application. And I think that's what's a lot of the excitement here is. So with our partners, we're looking at all parts of their business and changing business models, everything from supply chain, manufacturing, to how our customers see to or manage their platforms, to also how they do maintenance. And so it's changing how the businesses operate, their margins, how they produce things differently, but then also changing the TTPs or how our customers are designing their forces and how they're thinking about they do operations.
And are you guys worried about the flattening of the competitive field as well, or do you guys think that you've got enough secret sauce to carry you through this?
So we're really excited that, especially for the Defense Department, there's a broadening of the DIB. There's a discussion on this before, right? So it's really exciting to see more players beyond just, the big five, being able to bring innovative new solutions in. The biggest thing that we're facing right now, the biggest challenge the customer is facing right now is the timeliness of these solutions. So it's great that they don't have to rely on systems that kind of force them to invent or develop new things from scratch. Instead, go to industry, see what's developing out there, rapidly integrate them, put them in the hands of the warfighter, and kind of really see the new techniques that evolve from there.
Steve, I want to shift to you. Nobody's more synonymous with vertical flight than Sikorsky, Igor Sikorsky, his desk and his hat enshrined up in Connecticut. I would like to point out to the audience, the first helicopter combat mission was in 1944 in Burma with a YR-4B, I think, helicopter. That's going to tax my memory. You guys are in the largest area of heavy lift, the CH-53K, to the Super Stallion, Super King Stallion, I think it's called now, and also all the way down to much smaller products and systems in the eVTOL space and others. You guys had invested in compound coaxial that didn't necessarily work out this iteration, but you guys never forget a good technology. What do you see that vertical flight? Because if we look at it, runways are going to be challenged. Everybody wants more range. Everybody wants things faster than a Black Hawk, even though a Black Hawk is a terrific airplane. How are you guys looking at that deep future?
Yeah, well, thanks for the opportunity. And we continue to invest in our core technology like the K, Black Hawk modernization. For the Navy, it's service-like modernization. We see these aircraft around for decades. As far as our X2 technology, we think it's a great technology, and we have international customers who are interested in that. We recently did a demo down in Florida for those customers flying our Raider aircraft. So if you want to go fast along the tree line, get in, have low signatures into a tight landing zone and come out, it's a really great aircraft for that. But it is changing too. To your point, there are smaller aircraft that are coming out, more UAVs. Believe it or not, we're starting to invest in wing-borne flight. We call it rotor-blown wing. Takes off like a helicopter, can maneuver like a helicopter, and then as you get into forward flight, it gets fully up on the wing. That's a scalable design, so anywhere from a couple 100 pounds to several thousand pounds. Good for manned and unmanned flight. We continue to invest in autonomy. We call it matrix autonomy. It helps on all different missions, both military and commercial. As Darren mentioned, modular open system approach. We want our aircraft to be modular, be able to have a third party come in, speed of warfare, be able to switch something in out very quickly, and then be a node on the battlefield with all the amount of information that's out there, being really to put C2 systems on our aircraft.
So each one of you, by the way, is teamed and partnered with GE. So even though GE's got a lot of AI, Brian, you're working with GE on this. 901 is key. Just very quickly tell the audience, right? I mean, there's a lot more life in the Black Hawk and what the 901 does. I don't want to make this a plug, but you can't have a Sikorsky guy and a GE guy not talk about why the Black Hawk is going to be better. Go ahead.
GE has been a great partner for decades, and most of our aircraft have GE engines on it, so the 901 is one of the latest examples. Quite frankly, we first ground run that aircraft on our Forest CP aircraft that we had in West Palm Beach. Right now, we're teamed, and Black Hawk aircraft in our Florida West Palm Beach facility has a 901 on it. We've ground run it for about 8 hours now. We're getting ready to go to a first flight in about a month or less.
And range, payload, what does that engine offer? Because at the end of the day, the engine drives a lot of that.
It does drive a lot of range and payload, and it helps with the Black Hawk modernization mission, so it's central to that. One of the big things I think it does is provide time on station for the Black Hawk with a lower fuel burn, so you can be out in the battlefield longer than a traditional Black Hawk would be.
And you're producing more power, and you're producing more cooling for the electronics.
Yes, sir.
Having ridden F-118 power, I can tell you GE's got a lot of reliability going on. Chris, Kratos is a fascinating company, having started in the wireless space 3 decades ago. I think people don't remember that as much as they remember what you guys are trying to do to reinvent, not just reconnaissance, aviation, but really the future of how the Air Force is going to operate. Indeed, it was Kratos, General Atomics, and a couple of other projects that led to the CCA program ultimately. You guys also, as everybody here on this stage is in a kind of a competitive space. Everybody thinks that they can get into the kind of aircraft you guys are working on. What's the future of unmanned aviation? on all, because you guys are going to be a player in each one of these increments, given that you guys have had a very innovative streak to you.
Yeah, I think there's a common theme in Kratos. You want to bring a lot of edge to the performance. You need to compete from a performance standpoint, but we also want to be the price leaders. We're trying to bring to unmanned systems both lower cost structure and the ability to buy more of them, because that affordable mass is important. We're trying to bring the technologies to bear to allow the DoD to act on that.
What are the most enabling technologies from your standpoint, especially, and how you guys are sort of discriminating? I don't want to get into your entire secret sauce recipe, but how are you guys, what are the most interesting things you're focusing on that will deliver those effects?
Well, pretty much in a propulsion system, it's pretty complex. There's a cutaway up there that GE has that's really nice, and I think people focus on the rotating hardware. It's really cool, everything that spins in the combustor. We call that the flow path hardware. So you got to make sure that you're not doing any extra stuff there. It's the stuff you need to do. So expendable engines last maybe 2 hours. The material choices, the special processes, the extra features have to be eliminated so you can reach cost. But the real cost game is on the outside of the engine, the controls and accessories. And 10 years ago, we didn't have capability to make fuel pumps and oil pumps and digital engine controls or power control modules or generators. Right. We can do all of that now, and the reason that we put so much effort into that discipline is because we had to control our destiny on cost. That's the flow path hardware is about 60% of the bill of material. The controls and accessories on a small engine is about 40%. So the flow path hardware is almost at entitlement, but you can really radically reduce the price by being able to compete and or source because you're sourcing from a position of strength.
We've got about 6 minutes, and now I want to go down the line about we have a new administration in place. They want to. We heard from Chris Miller earlier in the great conversation with Steve how to better harness technology. We heard from the ranking member, the chairman, DIU. Darren, fascinating dinner last night, right? I mean, as Chris said, the key is how much do you need and how much is too much. From your standpoint, what does the Pentagon need to do differently if we want to get to that innovative future? And we're going to go down the line with each of you guys.
I think we have to look at risk and requirements. And when I say risk, don't take that to mean safety. Safety is always paramount. When I talk about risk, we have a traditional approach that we've done for many years, which is where we design and then test component by component by component. All those components come up together eventually to make the engine. Instead of that approach, if we can get to the full-scale engine system faster and get the engine tested, that's a much more efficient way to find and the learnings. And you have to be willing to have some failures when you do that because you haven't gone component by component by component. I think the other piece is the requirements. We have to establish a set of requirements that give some flexibility in the design process. If the requirements are too strict and too detailed, you can really wind up over-designing something. So those are the two areas I'd recommend we talk about.
Brian?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think a lot of the processes and a lot of our assumptions were based on that you had to invent something new. At this point, there's just so much technology that's out there in the commercial space. Rather, the processes and the policies should be supporting how do you rapidly integrate and how do you rapidly field these solutions. So before, where the risk calculus was designing a process around how you mitigate around large capital expenditures or long time horizons. Instead, we want to get into that rapid iteration cycle. So how do you drive it so that you're reducing switching costs between vendors so you don't have long-term contracts for cost plus. Instead, what does it look like to do commercial item procurement, use things like OTAs, acquire things as a service, really change the business model for the businesses and also how the services are both testing, evaluating, and also employing these new technologies.
Just briefly, is the customer getting better at buying AI and software?
Parts of the customer are, but again, like I said, the ubiquity of this technology makes it so that every single part of the DoD needs to be re-looking at how they're looking at both modernization of legacy systems, bringing on board new software systems, and also looking at these combined hardware software solutions that really require kind of a new way of thinking across the board.
Steve?
Two great answers. I'll add to it collaboration. How do we collaborate together as one team and more so up front? Example is when I had a really difficult technical problem on the CH-53K, we solved it together with the government. In fact, remember sitting next to my counterpart at design review and had to turn to him who was briefing, and I was like, is that your guy or my guy? And I couldn't even tell, and we solved that problem very quickly together. The other may be more commercial type models. I think we can sometimes move faster in the commercial world, and sometimes we get a little bit more latitude and a little more trust to be able to manage the design.
Chris?
I think one of the things that's working well right now is the connectivity in the different weapons organizations. You have the labs talking to the PO propulsion, who's talking to Eglin, the weapons guys who are talking to the Navy weapons guys. And before, it was individual programs that they were focused on, and I think the CCA effort and the need for more cruise missiles is really driving that. How do we fix the industrial base? And, I call it the big hot solution. Right. It takes lots of people focused on the same thing to really make a change, and I actually see that working right now.
I've got about 2 minutes, and I'll let whoever wants to pick on this, or all of you, if you guys want to. The government is getting rid of people at a historic scale. Research and development funding is being cut. Older folks are retiring, so it's contributing to the great graying out. Probationary employees are being sacked. Hiring is going to decrease. All of that affects the entire programmatic ecosystem, right? We don't have enough experienced people to make some of these things happen, which is why we were bringing new people up. Are there challenges, opportunities? What is this going to look like, and how are each of you protecting yourselves? Because, is the customer going to come to you and have you guys do more certification, for example? Just real quick, what does that look like in the next minute and a half?
Well, I'll offer, it also helps us with affordability. We know that it's challenging to fund all these development programs, and one of the things that we're going to is a model-based enterprise to be able to share data better and do more with less, and that includes bringing in our customers and our suppliers into that model-based enterprise, and also promoting knowledge continuity across our workforce. So it's amazing when you team a more experienced engineer with a younger engineer, how much they can learn from each other and keep challenging them in that innovative environment to go faster.
I agree with Stephen. I would add to that, making sure that we connect engineers to manufacturing is incredibly important. To some degree, that's been a lost skill in my opinion. Engineers can spend a lot of time at the computer. They need to be on the manufacturing floor. They need to be coordinating with the folks that are actually making the hardware. The other thing I would say is, from a leadership perspective, my job is to be a servant leader. My job is to facilitate my team in terms of removing constraints for them, understanding what they need to do their job. And there's an element of that that's really important, humility. And at GE, we have our flight deck operating system that's really pinned on that basis of humility and being a servant leader.
And you could see the customer maybe leaning more on you ultimately if it is going to be a gap in skills on the government side.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, and again, I think it's a change in the structures, right? So it's changing maybe the rules of, let's say, like the labs, for example. Do they need to invent things in the labs? Or really, is their purpose going to be different? Are they going to be the primary evaluators of the technology? And then where is that actual technology being developed, and is it iterated upon? It's probably in the field. So the lab is now the battlefield, and like seeing the iteration that happens out there.
We're at 0 time. Chris, if you have 5 seconds, I think Steve will give you 5 seconds.
Well, I think it's important to be diversified right now. We love defense engines, but we also have a commercial engine business, space and hypersonics, and an overhaul business in Bristol, Oklahoma. And you can't predict the future, but when you're in lots of areas of propulsion, which happen to all be growing right now, I think that just helps you to continue to grow and be available for defense.
Guys, thanks very, very much. Honored to be here today. Thanks very much to GE, and happy 1-year birthday. Steve?
I just want to say, first of all, Vago, great panel, and I want to give a personal thanks to Bryant Chung. I normally wear a Palantir fleece, but I didn't do it because I'm trying to get a GE Aerospace fleece. So, but I want to thank Palantir. Darren Di Tomaso, wonderful comments. Chris Likens, it's great to see you again. And of course, Steve Schmidt and Vago, great panel. And let me just say in conclusion, I always feel like, I should be, it's kind of like a 10K race. You get in the door, somebody starts with you. Some of you were here at the beginning, some of you made it all the way to the end. I feel like we ought to give you some swag or something. We'll work on that with our host. But I want to thank you all. And I want to ask, when I do when I'm at a meeting, whether we're involved in presenting it or I'm just in the room, did we get in the room where it happens? Did we get into the subject matter in any credible way, or were we vapid or distant? And what I feel like is we really did get in the room. We're with people who are sculpting the future of national defense. Really grateful to GE Aerospace and all of our speakers that have joined us, to our fantastic moderators, including Vago, but also Gene Meserve. And I want to thank Amy Gowder, the president and CEO of GE Aerospace, for doing this. And I want to tell you that when there's a true thing, and I haven't heard it go off yet. I'm keep waiting for it to go off. The big thing I've asked for, there. So, I yesterday saw pictures when I was traveling of the engines, and I said, God, those are pretty engines, but it would be great if we could hear them. And they said, oh, we've got that packed. So I want to invite those of you who don't know everyone in the room, spend some time, meet some new people. Our cappuccino machines with the 3D sculpted F-15 on them are available to you up there still. Go check out the engines. But thank you all very much for joining us. Thanks again to Amy Gowder and her fantastic team at GE Aerospace. Thank you all. Thanks, Darren.